It was a cold, early morning, and the road seemed endless. I had just finished an extra shift at work and was heading home, alone. The silence of the deserted road was only interrupted by the monotonous hum of the engine. There was almost no sign of life around, just trees on both sides and the dark asphalt stretching ahead. My only company was the sound of the radio, which occasionally faded into static due to the lack of signal. That's when I saw someone up ahead, a dark silhouette by the roadside, with an outstretched arm and thumb up, hitchhiking. It was a tall man wearing a heavy coat with a backpack slung to the side. Something about him seemed off. Maybe it was his too rigid posture or the way he looked directly at the car without blinking. But that feeling of dread hit me, and I ignored my intuition, thinking I was just tired. I slowed down, and as I stopped beside him, I rolled down the window. The man stared at me expressionlessly and, without asking permission, opened the door and got in. As soon as he settled into the seat, a strange smell filled the car. It was the smell of damp earth and something metallic like blood. I tried to ignore it, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Where to?" I asked, trying to be polite. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly turned his face to me, and a narrow, almost artificial smile appeared on his face. "As far as you can take me," he said, in a low, drawling voice. I kept driving, but a feeling of discomfort began to take over. I tried to make small talk, asking his name, but he only glanced at me sideways, with that smile that didn't match his empty eyes. After a while, the silence grew so heavy that even the engine seemed muffled. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw something strange. A figure moving along the road I had just come from. Something that shouldn't have been there. It was a person walking in our direction. I was confused, as there had been no one there when I stopped to pick up the man. I tried to ignore it, but the man beside me noticed I was looking in the mirror. He turned his face and looked as well, and then, without warning, his smile vanished. A flash of desperation crossed his eyes. "Drive faster," he murmured, his voice now tense. My heart raced and I obeyed without question. The man seemed nervous, occasionally looking back with an expression bordering on panic. Then I looked again in the rearview mirror and saw the figure even closer. It seemed to be wearing the same clothes as the man beside me, but the face, it was distorted, unrecognizable, like a shadow with vacant, piercing eyes and an expression of silent rage. Who is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man swallowed hard, staring intently at the road ahead, ignoring my question. "He's been following me for days. No matter how far I run, he always finds me," he whispered, almost to himself. I felt sweat trickling down my forehead, and all I wanted was for this man to get out of my car. But he seemed glued to the seat, as if his life depended on it. "You have to help me," he said, his voice shaking. "He won't stop as long as I'm here. Please." I didn't know what to do. The figure was getting closer and closer, and the man's panic was contagious. That's when he suddenly opened the door, even with the car still moving, and jumped out, rolling onto the asphalt. I blinked, unable to believe what I was seeing, and stopped the car a little further up, still in shock. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to understand. The figure had stopped next to the fallen man, and, to my horror, it crouched down, pulling him by the arm, as if it were dragging him off the road. I couldn't tell if the man was conscious, but what I saw made me speed off like never before. After that night, I never wanted to drive alone on that road again. And every time I see someone hitchhiking by the roadside, I remember that empty face, that figure that seemed to feed off fear. Not long ago, I took a solo car trip that still haunts me. It was late at night, and I was returning from a visit to relatives in the countryside. The GPS suggested an alternative route, a shorter but isolated one. Trusting it, I thought it would be a good idea. The road was winding and surrounded by dense forests, and the few houses I saw seemed abandoned. My only companion was the sound of the engine and the rustling of trees in the wind. The GPS indicated I still had about 50 kilometers to go. I turned on the radio to distract myself, but all I got was static. Then I started noticing footprints. On the damp asphalt, I could see fresh marks, as if someone had walked there. It was strange, as it was almost midnight, and that place was practically deserted. I decided to ignore it and kept driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. 15 minutes later, I noticed something even stranger. A figure by the roadside, standing still, staring at me. It had a rigid posture and wore dark clothes. I felt tense and avoided looking directly, but its eyes were fixed on me as I passed. A look that seemed to mix hatred and a kind of expectation. It gave me chills. A few more kilometers and I saw another figure, identical to the first, standing by the road with the exact same expression. My eyes widened and I began to sweat. It was impossible. It was as if I'd gone back in time or was in some kind of loop. I blinked, and the figure disappeared in my rearview mirror. As I drove, I started to feel as though the figure was now inside the car, even without looking directly. I could see a silhouette in my peripheral vision, always there like a shadow, but it was sharper than a shadow should be. Then, a knocking sound echoed from the trunk. It was a dull thud, like someone was trapped inside. I didn't have the courage to stop. I just kept driving, ignoring the fear that was starting to take hold of me. But the sound grew louder, more intense, as if something was desperately trying to get out. The road seemed endless, and the knocking continued. My only option was to keep driving, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel so tightly. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a town up ahead. I turned onto the first street and stopped the car in the middle of a square, lit by a few streetlights. I got out of the car, trembling, and went to the trunk, though I didn't really want to open it. But the need to confirm I was safe was stronger. I opened it slowly, and to my relief, it was empty. As I closed the trunk and exhaled in relief, a terrible feeling washed over me, that someone was right behind me, less than a meter away. I turned quickly, and for a second, I saw the face of that figure watching me, far too close, with a smile that seemed to yearn for something. It was the same face I'd seen by the roadside, but much paler and closer. I blinked, and it was gone. Since then, I avoid driving alone at night. I don't know what happened on that road, but I still feel the presence of that figure. Sometimes, when I drive down darker streets, I swear I see its reflection in the mirror, just for an instant, as if it's still following me. It was supposed to be just another night drive home. I had left work late and took the deserted road as a shortcut. Driving alone at night didn't scare me. On the contrary, I enjoyed the solitude, the silence. But that night, something was different. As soon as I entered the less illuminated stretch of the road, I felt a strange sense of unease. The highway was dark, and although it was normal for there to be few cars at that hour, the emptiness of that night felt heavier. Then the radio stopped working, just static. Even when I adjusted the tuning, nothing. I decided to turn it off. The only light was from my headlights, illuminating the contours of the winding, empty road. That's when I saw it for the first time. Something in the middle of the road, about 50 meters ahead. I tensed up and eased off the accelerator, but as I got closer, I saw it was just a dead animal, probably run over. I swerved around it and kept going. About 15 minutes later, however, I saw it again. Another dead animal, but this time it looked fresher, as if it had been hit recently. I felt a chill. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was swallowed by darkness. It was strange, but I decided to ignore it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. The road remained empty, and I started feeling the weight of exhaustion. My eyes burned. I blinked quickly, trying to stay alert. But then, I noticed something in the passenger seat out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure. The shock was so great, I nearly lost control of the car. I looked to the side, and the seat was empty. Just my jacket piled up there. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just my tiredness playing tricks. But things only got worse. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the back seat, like someone had slapped the upholstery. I swallowed hard and looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. But the feeling of not being alone took hold of me. My fingers grew cold on the steering wheel. I tried to speed up to get out of there as quickly as possible, but the car began to lose speed. I looked at the fuel gauge. It was almost empty, even though I had filled the tank before leaving. The engine made a strange noise, and the dashboard lights began to flicker as if something was wrong. I was forced to pull over. Everything around me was completely dark, with no sign of other cars or even a light post. I turned off the car and sat in silence for a moment, trying to listen for any sounds around me. That's when I felt it. A weight like a presence beside me. The air grew cold, and my instincts told me not to look. But it was impossible to resist. I knew I wasn't alone there. I slowly turned my head, and there, sitting in the passenger seat, was someone. An indistinct figure with a face obscured by shadow, but with eyes that seemed to pierce through me. My body froze, unable to move. It was as if the very air had become a heavy, dense mass holding me to the seat. And then it smiled. It was a broken smile, like its face was deformed. And as I looked, it slowly leaned toward me. I don't remember exactly what happened after that. Somehow, I managed to get out of the car, stumbling as my heart raced out of control. I ran along the dark road, aimless, only wanting to get away. After a while, I saw the headlights of a truck in the distance and waved desperately. The driver stopped and gave me a ride to the nearest town. To this day, I don't know who or what that thing was in the car with me, but every night, when I close my eyes, I see it sitting beside me, in that seat, waiting,